Hello, we are LuciaRivas, Mauro Coccaro, and myself, Miriam Shermani. We are English phonology teachers at the Human Sciences faculty at the National University of La Pampa in Argentina. We teach English intonation to English trainee teachers, and we've started exploring the role of phonology in discourse with the aim of helping our students to perceive the importance of phonology in the projection of meaning at the level of discourse. Our general interest is to observe how speakers make phonological choices in combination with lexicogrammatical ones to project meanings in context. In our exploration, we've started a research project at our university in which we study the role of phonological choices in the projection and imposition of ideological positions in text, paying attention to the enactment of interpersonal relationships between interlocutors, and to the projection of dominance and solidarity in discourse. For this, we study oral discourse in the media, samples we can access from the internet. In the case of this presentation, we'll explore an accountability news interview that opens and closes in disagreement. This interview can be classified as an accountability interview on the basis of the identity of the interviewee, a public figure called upon to be queried regarding his own deeds, in this case, the publication of a controversial book. While the interviewer queries the basis of a statement, the interviewee seeks to justify it. In media interviews, as in other forms of institutional interaction, the topics, actions, and order of interventions are organized from the beginning in an explicit and predictable way. Turn types are drastically reduced to the adjacency pair question-answer, though in accountability interviews, according to Cornelia Illier, the question-answer exchange often includes a follow-up as a third turn in terms of Coulthard and Brazil, 1992, which allows the interviewer, and I quote, to assess and comment on the appropriateness of the interviewee's answer, as well as to shape the line of subsequent questioning according to a specifically chosen agenda, end of quote.
Within the different strata of the language system, the phonology constitutes the level of expression, the way through which language materializes into phonic substance. But, as Halliday and Greaves state, sounds are thought of not as the expression of something else which exists independently of them, but as an integral part of a single complex phenomenon, a language. If we consider meaning as choice, we'd like to show here this chart taken from Halliday, quoting Hemsleb, where we can see that the content plane and the expression plane, the lexicogrammar and the phonology, constitute the form. And in terms of Halliday, this is the two quintessentially systemic strata, where meanings and sounds are organized as recognizable dimensions of choice. Speakers make language choices in both these planes to project their meanings. Choices in form make sense in the context of the social environment, eco-social environment, semantics, and in the context of the somatic environment, the signifying body, the phonetics. Intonation patterns orient to the participants in the interaction and contribute to represent their identities and interpersonal relationships while they play their part in the creation of text. As Shepard-Reeds posits, the prosodic patterns in a text are described and interpreted always in relation to the linguistic and interactional events that co-occur with them in a certain moment. Debate interviews in the media can at times become a topic of interest in themselves and acquire a mediatized life of their own. And this is the case of the interview chosen for this work. It is a general interest interview broadcast by the British Channel 4 News on the 16th of January 2018, which awakened our interest due to the power struggle that takes place between the interviewer and interviewee. It can be classified as an accountability interview, whose main topic is gender inequality, in particular, the gender pay gap. The interviewer, Kathy Newman, is the leading presenter of the channel and suffered social media abuse and threats after she interviewed the well-known recent controversial psychologist and university professor Jordan Peterson, who had recently published the book 12 Rules for Life, An Antidote to Chaos. This interview was uploaded to YouTube, where we accessed it, and seen 8 million times during the following 2 months, according to the article in The Guardian. To work on this interview, we have carried out a macro analysis first, paying particular attention to features like turn taking, forms of address between interlocutors, establishing of topics, the framing of questioning and answering moves, and the fragments that showed ideological workings of our interest were listened to in more detail and transcribed tonetically, doing a perceptual analysis first and then validating it through instrumental means. We have analyzed and interpreted prosodic choices in the context of all other choices in the language system.
We based our analysis on the systemic functional linguistic description of intonation systems in combination with the ones proposed by discourse intonation. Within SFL, we have considered the choices the speaker makes within the systems of tonality, I mean, the way the material is chunked into information units, tonicity, the tonic placement, and tone, the pitch movement on the tonic with a fall, rise, fall, and level. Discourse intonation systems comprise prominence, the accented words, key, which is the pitch level on the onset in a system of high, mid, or low, and termination, the pitch level on the tonic, again with high, mid, or low, and also tone with the same 5 movements mentioned before. From a phonological point of view, interactional discursive dominance has been associated with 3 types of behavior that function independently. Those are systems of tone, key, and termination. Within the system of tone, the rising and rising-falling movements project a dominant speaker. As regards the system of key, the break in pitch concord, that is the discrepancy in pitch level between the termination choice by one speaker and the key choice of the next speaker. And the use of low termination also projects dominance. Within SFL, Tench associates interactional dominance to the use of falling and rising tones. The falling tones are associated with certainty and represent a speaker in the possession of knowledge with authority and power to decide. Rising tones, on the other hand, are associated with uncertainty and project a different speaker, somebody who doesn't know and asks. These 2 phonological descriptions appeal to different areas within the wide concept of dominance. While Tench refers to dominance with respect to knowledge of the topic and the projection of expertise, Brazil refers to it in relation to the control of the flow of the discourse and the allocation of speaker time. The interview starts in a controversial way. From the beginning, the interviewer shows her pre-established agenda for this interaction, which is the difference and the inequality between genders, particularly in the working world. The interviewee resists talking about that topic, and he implicitly seems to deny the existence of such inequality. The interviewer intends mainly through her formulations to take her guest in the direction of her own agenda, disambiguating what he says in his generalizations and value judgments, and also forcing him to recognize the existence of gender inequality. In the description that follows, we analyze in detail the first turns, which in our opinion set the tone of the debate of the interview, a tone that is held throughout and until the end. We then present one of these several resources used by the interviewer and the interviewee to exert dominance in their opposition of agendas.
In the transcription that you can see on the screen, we are using iconic tonetic marks to indicate the different tones. For example, you can see in the first unit the falling tone, second unit the level tone. The letters H and L in small capitals represent the pitch level of key and termination. And we use double bars to show the division of speech into information units. We validate our perceptions with the software for speech analysis Pratt, as we said before. So from the very beginning of the conversation, the interviewer introduces the first topic by reading a quote from the interviewee's book and demanding explanations from its author. Thus, she exercises her inherent role of host by controlling the topic and the flow of the discourse. In this way, Cathy Newman projects herself as someone who knows the book in detail and questions its content. Now we're going to listen.
You've said that men need to, quote, grow the hell up. Tell me why.
Well, because there's nothing uglier than an old infant. There's nothing good about it. People who don't grow up don't find the sort of meaning in their life that sustains them through difficult times, and they're certain to encounter difficult times. And they're left bitter and resentful and without purpose and adrift and hostile and resentful and vengeful and arrogant and deceitful and of no use to themselves and of no use to anyone else and no partner for a woman. There's nothing in it that's good.
So you said,
phonologically, Cathy Newman uses low termination both at the end of the quotation and at the end of her turn, projecting phonological dominance by closing both pitch sequences. With the first closure, she restricts the topic to the discussion of the quotation. And with the second, she demands an extended explanation. In addition, the second unit with high key on you, when she says, "You've said," adds an accusatory tone, which continues until the end of her turn, when the interviewer uses the imperative form, "Tell me why." The interviewee responds as expected, accepting his role and producing an extended turn, as you can see in the transcription. He answers categorically by using the simple present tense and negative polarity, and by establishing value judgments through subjective qualifications, as when he says they are left bitter and resentful and arrogant. His additive mid-key elaborates on the quote put forward by the interviewer, and he signals the end of his turn both phonologically through the use of the low termination and grammatically with the end of a syntactic unit.
In turn 3, the interviewer produces a follow-up move.
so you said, I mean, that sounds pretty bad. You're saying
It's
there's a
bad.
crisis of masculinity. I mean, what do you do about it?
You help people understand why it's necessary and important for them to grow up and adopt responsibility.
Well, the interviewer, as I said, produces a follow-up move, starting with a formulation interrupted midway by by an evaluation of Jordan Peterson's contribution. That sounds pretty bad, which is lexicogrammatically attenuated, as if it were just a first impression. But phonologically, it's asserted with a divergent tailing tone that signals her own perspective. She expects agreement from her interlocutor through a mid-termination, but Jordan Peterson puts his answer forward as a contrast through a high beginning, even when the lexicogramma suggests concurrence through lexical repetition. It's bad. His high beginning breaks pitch concord as well and projects him as a dominant participant who can assess the situation from a categorical perspective. Pitch concord is a restriction which operates at moments of speaker change, by which the first speaker establishes expectations of correlation in pitch level between the termination choice at the end of her turn and the next speaker's key choice at the beginning of his turn. The lack of pitch concord frequently has negative impact in the interaction, and the speaker causing it will be seen as claiming linguistic dominance. The interviewer disregards this comment without yielding the floor and reformulates Jordan Peterson's previous answers through a nominalization, which becomes the topic of our next question. You're saying this is a crisis of masculinity? What do you do about it? This turn is a new demand for explanations that challenges the interviewee. Again, he responds as expected, giving pitch concord in mid-key and producing an extended turn in which he brings into the discussion his online talks for the male audience, avoiding to refer to any gender controversy. The interviewer chooses this information for her next question and makes it lead to her pre-established agenda on gender issues. And it's mostly, you admit, it's mostly men listening. The interviewee offers a brief response, going back to his own agenda, which started in his previous turn about the talks to young men on YouTube.
2 turns later, the interviewer retakes the gender topic. She imposes it by asking 2 polar questions, which are intended as leading questions, constraining Jordan Peterson to the answer that is implicitly suggested.
That it's important to develop yourself.
But does it bother you that your audience is predominantly male? Isn't that a bit divisive?
No, I don't think so. I mean, it's no more divisive than the fact that YouTube is primarily male and Tumblr is primarily female.
Isn't it?
Tumblr is primarily female.
Okay, so her falling tones in the questions indicate that she expects new information, and her low termination at the end of the turn manifests a dominance, while she projects the expectation of a lengthy response. Jordan Peterson responds in disagreement to the assumption in the polar question, and so he ignores her agenda by using a divergent falling tone on the adverb no, highlighting the contrast in polarity by tonicity and a contrastive high key. However, he later mitigates this categorical negation by adding, I don't think so, with a socially convergent tone, which softens the force of the negative, to later restrict the scope of the question to an issue related to the nature of some social networks. And therefore, he refuses to take the gender inequality issue as a topic of discussion.
From then on, this pattern is repeated. The interviewer insists on her pre-established agenda, and therefore she demands explanations from her guest, who does not even acknowledge that the gender gap is the topic for discussion, and continuously rejects the host's formulations. He does this in a categorical manner, which fuels the initial controversy, at times questioning categorically with falling intonation, denying such formulations. For example, saying, I'm just not saying, I didn't say, I'm not saying. In addition, he resorts to his expert knowledge and experience, projecting himself as dominant in his area of expertise, and using this to validate his words. For example, saying, I'm a clinical psychologist, or we are social scientists worth your salt. In what follows, we show the analysis of some exchanges that display the participants' antagonistic ideological positions along the whole of the interview. A frequent mechanism to set agendas in this interview is the use of formulations, which present the speaker as a non-neutral participant who actively interprets all questions preceding talk. Question participants respond to these challenges by showing resistance to the contrastive and skeptical nature of the "you say X" device. Kathy Newman uses formulations extensively in this interview. We identified 27 cases of the lexical structure, so you are saying, or similar forms. And she uses it to realign what Jordan Peterson says towards her perspective and to redirect the discussion into her agenda. In this way, she confronts Jordan Peterson's saying and makes him focus on particular issues, on the one hand attributing him a certain positioning and holding him responsible for his words, and on the other, challenging him to defend or explain his stance.
Well, in turns 15 and 16, the interviewee reacts by rejecting Kathy Newman's formulation.
Female, isn't it? Tumblr is primarily female.
But you're just saying that's the way it is.
Well, I'm not saying anything. It's just an observation that that's the way it is.
So his low termination suggests that there's nothing else to say. Reformulating her words, I mean, he reformulates her words with contrastive high key, and he establishes his opinion as a fact by means of categorical statement, and that's the way it is, without offering any evidence to support his words.
The following excerpt shows Kathy Newman's reformulating Jordan Peterson's term.
Break it down by personality.
But you're saying basically it doesn't matter if women aren't getting to the top, because that's what's skewing that gender pay gap, isn't it? You're saying, well, that's just a fact of life. Women aren't necessarily going to get to the top.
No, I'm not saying it doesn't matter either.
You're saying
I'm saying there are multiple reasons for it.
Yep.
Well, we see Cathy Newman formulating Jordan Peterson's previous turn. And in this 4-turn sequence, Cathy Newman uses the words "you're saying" to introduce her formulation with contrastive high key, accusatory prominence on the pronoun you, and low termination at the end of her first turn. Jordan Peterson rejects this first formulation, "I'm not saying, it doesn't matter," and then formulates the second one. "I'm saying there are multiple reasons for it," using high termination in falling tone in both cases, which underscores his rejection and urges his interlocutor to provide a committed answer. In addition, there is overlapping in the 4 turns, which reveals the speaker's struggle to take the floor and to impose their views. Jordan Peterson resists Cathy Newman's questioning by using negation or correcting the formulation, which creates an environment of adversity and lack of alignment between the participants. It can be appreciated that he recognizes the formulation of his words and disputes it.
Our analysis has allowed us to demonstrate that how phonological choices play an important role together with other choices in the language system to project the interlocutor's identity and the opposing ideological positionings in this particular type of encounter. We have shown a detailed analysis of the first few turns in the conversation, which, in our opinion, set the adversarial tone for the rest of the interview. Due to the time limit of this presentation, we then focused the rest of our discussion section on the use of formulations, as they are one recurrent strategy used by the interviewer to set and police her agenda, something which was systematically resisted and challenged by her interviewee. The turns where formulations occur are also moments in the interview where ideological work comes to the foreground. The interviewer formulates her interviewee's contributions in an attempt to force him to accept her initial agenda of an existing gender pay gap. The interviewee, who denies such an issue from the start, resists her interviewer's queries from a dominant perspective. The behavior of both interlocutors displays a confrontation of agendas and of ideological positionings all along the interaction. To close our presentation, we would like to say that we believe that an analysis of oral language which aims at being critical cannot disregard the central role of phonology in the construction of identities. And these are our references. Thank you very much.